Veera Hiranandani's. Her books have received the Newbery Honor, the Walter Dean Myers Honor, and the Malka Penn Award for Human Rights in Children's Literature. And as a kid, she was a connoisseur of video games when we all needed handfuls of quarters to play them. Her latest work is the novel How to Find What You Are Not Looking For, which is mirrored. It's right above my head. Ron L. Smith won the Credit Scott King John Steptoe New Talent Author Award for his first novel, Hoodoo, and subsequent novels include Gloomtown, a Junior Library Guild selection, and Black Panther the Young Prince. His latest book is the sequel, Black Panther Spellbound, which has been delayed by shipping complications and paper shortages, but I promise you, it is worth the wait and the anticipation. I am Will Alexander. I used to work at Rain Taxi and the Twin Cities Book Festival. It is an honor to be back. Thank you all for joining us today. Okay, questions. Let's talk about voice and what it takes to be heard. These three books may at first glance seem utterly different from each other: a memoir, a realist fiction novel, and a portrait of the Wakandan king as a young man, but they share so much. And I want to start this conversation by asking you all about shared voices. So Lexi and Susan first. Okay, it is notoriously difficult to collaborate with anyone on a book-length project. How did the two of you forge this mother-daughter team?
You want to go first? Yeah. So I've thankfully got Lexi's answers to her questions ahead of time. So I'm going to read these out for her. Her augmentative communication device is terrible over the internet. So I'm just going to read her answers for you, and we'll let Lexi just react as we do that. So Lexi says, our collaboration feels completely normal because I've been writing with Mom forever. When I was a baby, she would put me on her lap and hold my elbow, and I could drag magnetic letters around an old cookie sheet and spell. After that, I was homeschooled, and we worked together on writing assignments from the very first day of school. We would write out things that happened to IRL, in real life, that were funny or weird, and in doing that, we figured out how to work together to write a story. So for me, I have never not collaborated with her. And I'll agree with her. Collaborating with Lexi feels very natural. I am pretty much naturally a collaborator. In my medical writing, I had a medical writing partner, so I always collaborated and sent things back and forth. To me, I know it sounds really difficult to try to write with someone who can't speak, but when you have such a close relationship and we've worked out our communication over the years, we definitely it's the easiest collaboration I have. I can't imagine it any other way. I can't, other than my medical writing, I don't think I could do this with anyone else, but with Lexi, she makes it really easy.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Veera, How to Find What You're Not Looking For, also has a complex relationship to fact and family history. What can you share with us about that complexity?
Sure. Well, I tend to, look at my own life and my family history for inspiration. I find that just keeps me really engaged in the amount of time it takes to write a novel. So I think I'm just sort of figuring out kind of the why and the how of sort of my own background and how I got here, but then also figuring out how to create a fictional experience that is maybe dealing with some questions, but also has its own life. So this book was inspired by my parents' decision to get married in 1968. And my mom is Jewish American, and my father was born in India, came to the US, met my mom. And it made me think about, the 1967 Loving versus Virginia Supreme Court ruling, which only a year before they got married, banned any laws against interracial marriage in the country. And I had thought about the fact of, if my parents had wanted to get married a year earlier in another state, they were in Connecticut, but in a state like Virginia, where it was literally illegal for them to get married, what decisions would they have made? So I tried to, but I didn't want to tell their exact story. So I sort of moved it to a younger person's point of view, whose older sister falls in love with an Indian college student and in 1967, right after the Loving ruling, and how that sort of shapes the dynamics of their families and kind of changes their lives forever. So that's sort of what I was trying to combine in the novel.
Excellent. Thank you. And to continue the thread of, yes, Ron, Black Panther, Spellbound, has so many legacies to honor, both Wakandan and American. How did you approach the daunting task of donning that mantle and writing T'Challa and honoring the voices that came before, including everyone who has ever written T'Challa?
Wow, yeah, I know. Boy, that's scary, isn't it? You make it sound very scary. And it was. I mean, first of all, it's such a great honor to write for Marvel, a dream come true, something I never imagined in my wildest dreams. And then to write this iconic character that everybody knows, Black Panther, superhero, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. So I think it's my responsibility to fans, to kids, to adults, to get the character right, to honor the legacy that's come before. You know, there's been so much great world building and mythology that's already out there. And so my job is just to take a young T'Challa, we know an older T'Challa from the movies and the comics, but what is he like as a kid? And hopefully that can also be true to what we see as him as an adult. So it's the same person, but what is he like as a kid? So it's a big responsibility, but I feel like if I can really write about the things that are important to him and the things that we know of him, honor, integrity, strength, you know, love of country, all that stuff, I'm just building on this legacy that great writers and illustrators and graphic artists and pencilers have done before. So it's a real honor to just kind of add to that legacy and do the best job I can.
Thank you. More about legacies. So we've got family legacies made fiction. We've got Marvel legacies worked back into childhood. And Lexi and Susan, so you're not only the authors of The Year of the Buttered Cat, you're both also characters. Your younger selves are characters in this book. Lexi's the first person narrator of the book. So the legacy I'm focusing in on here is the voice of your younger self. How did you capture the voices of your younger selves while writing this mostly true memoir?
Shall I start on this one? Yeah. So, you know, it's a dual timeline story. There's Lexi at 5 and 6 years old is the backstory. That the front story is Lexi at 13, about to undergo her second brain surgery. And that one was actually done almost in real time. I mean, that was almost done. So we didn't really have to work too hard to capture a different voice on that. I mean, we were living that, experiencing that. A lot of the things that happened in that were actually things that happened right in those moments. So that part was pretty easy. The backstory was a little harder for me, especially because I had to go back and relive a really, really difficult time in my life, the worst time. You know, I had had a kid who had experienced a traumatic brain injury at the hands of somebody that we thought we trusted, you know, her doctor. And the fallout from that, you know, how it affected our entire family. Lexi's the youngest of 5 kids. So, you know, those sort of things happen to an entire family. I had to relive the worst period of my life. So Lexi can tell you, we would sit and write and cry and then sit and write and cry. And it was not, you know, that was for me, a much harder period to authentically go back and capture. Lexi's thoughts on that, I thought were interesting. She said, since I ranged from 5 to 13 years old in Buttered Cat, I think it was trickier to figure out my voices. And add to that, I was never really a typical 5-year-old, crazy far behind physically, but also thinking about much more advanced subjects intellectually. So in the book, my young Lexi and teen Lexi voices may blur a little at times. In some respects, that was helpful. I mean, what middle grade kid wants to constantly be reminded they're reading a story about a 5-year-old? But we did have to make sure to let the typical 5-year-old shine through. And for me, a lot of that involved reliving sibling experiences, how I looked up to my three sisters and the typical rivalry between me and my brother Tucker, who was closest to me in age. And I agree. I'll reiterate with that. I mean, it was hard because she was never a typical little kid, not just because she couldn't walk or talk, but, her advanced intellect, she was spelling and reading by the time she was 10 months old. She didn't want to watch kid TV. She watched Giada. She loved cooking shows. And, thankfully she found early on a love of superheroes and Marvel, and she found a way to connect to other people, but really she was thinking about things that little children weren't thinking about. So she was right. That her young voice was hard to make it, even though it was authentic to her. I think it was a little harder to make it authentic maybe to the reader, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I love the moment when that crystallizes for the reader at the very beginning of the book is spelling out the word apostrophe at younger than 5. I think that's like 3 in that scene.
Well, yeah, she was about, that was her transition to kindergarten, so she was 4-ish.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that, yeah, I love that. That's the way that dramatized. Oh, wait a minute. We're working at an apostrophe spelling level. Good, cool. It's a great recalibration of expectations.
Yeah, she didn't have the advanced the set letters with all of
the punctuation.
Punctuation. Sorry, I couldn't find that word first.
Cheers.
Had to spell it out. Had to spell out apostrophe.
Thank you both. Switching over to Veera, and the transition here is still talking about narration and point of view, and highlighting one thing that sets this book apart from most others. How to Find What You're Not Looking For is written in the second person. Veera, could you read just the very beginning of the first chapter for us to get a taste of that?
Yes, and this is when I'm in a hotel room, and I'm hoping to kind of mess this part up. I don't know if you have the book.
I do. Right
okay.
Here.
I was trying to get it digitally, and I might hold on.
I can cut and paste the very beginning into the chat if you want it.
Yeah, I was trying to get it digitally, and I couldn't get it quick enough. So
sure. It's I think this one's okay.
Thank you so much.
There's the chapter title is there, and then that's like the first paragraph.
Okay. So the chapter title is How to Be the Lazy One. It's harder than you think. First, lie on your messy bed wearing your Wonder Woman pajamas that are too small because you've had them since you were 9. So that's the very beginning, and it continues in that second person point of view throughout the whole novel, it was really a challenge. At times it felt like it wasn't working, and it was really awkward, and I wanted it to be something that the reader maybe wrestles with in the beginning because it's an unfamiliar point of view, and maybe they're not even realizing why something might seem a little disorienting. And then I wanted it to just sort of become natural and flow. And part of the reason I wanted to use the second person point of view is it kind of links arms with the reader, and sort of, you as the reader are the main character and the main character is you. It's sort of this combination where you become kind of one with the main character in a way that maybe you haven't experienced before, especially as a young reader, because there aren't a lot of books in second person for younger readers. And I had been reading books, for adults, and sort of when I was studying writing, and found myself really fascinated by the second person point of view. And I had tried it a few times. I actually tried to write my first novel in the second person, but that was more of just like trying it, and then it wasn't really working. So for this novel, I felt like there was something about the character of Ariel, where she was going through such a specific experience, a Jewish girl in 1967, growing up. Her parents run a bakery. They're in a community in Connecticut where there aren't a lot of other Jewish families. And then her sister falls in love with an Indian college student, and her parents are against the marriage, and she has to sort of understand why her parents would feel that way, and her sister's choices, and also developing a relationship with her sister's boyfriend who becomes her husband, and understanding who he is and liking him, and just what that all means for her. And if a reader doesn't have, maybe they have a lot in common with Ariel, maybe they have nothing in common in Ariel, and how would it feel to sort of become a character that maybe you don't have anything in common with? She's also experiencing a learning difference at school and feels a little isolated socially. And she's also experiencing some anti-Semitism from a bully at school. And so what would that feel like to just be Ariel, whether you relate to her experiences or not? So that was kind of the experiment that I was undertaking with the second person point of view.
Excellent. Thank you. And added to the other things in common, things that may be different between the reader and the protagonist that they are then becoming. I thought it was an amazing way, in particular, of making the time period. I mean, of which is, I mean, you know, the 60s is not ancient history, but it was ago, and it's a very different time and place from the now of a middle grade reader, and so bridging that temporal difference.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, I thought I love that. I love that part of it, of making. I mean, so many, you know, period TV pieces, like they'll hone in on everything that's different, so we'll be overwhelmed with, I don't know, bell bottoms and the music,
right.
and
yeah, and I was trying to pick and choose, you know, what would signal the 60s without sort of doing all the tropes, you know, and so we'll see. People will let me know.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Yeah, you're right there. You're right there in a way that's so much less distancing than a period drama usually does.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, Ron. So voice. This whole panel is about voice. We're talking about voice, and so many voices and modes of voice, crowd stirring oratory, magic spells, hypnosis, all of that plays such an important role in Spellbound. What did you want to dramatize about the spoken word in particular?
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. You know, I think it really boils down to power, you know, and what you can do with a voice. You know, whether it's like MLK or Winston Churchill or a Baptist preacher in church on Sunday morning, you know, voices have power, right? And we are influenced by them. Not just the words that they're saying, but the actual physical act of speaking something into existence, right? So in this book, it would not be a spoiler because it's on the jacket copy to say that there's a character named Bob. And if you're a deep Marvel fan, you might know what that relates to, a guy named Dr. Bob. So he has this gift of oratory and a few other things that one might discover that really get people to follow him, to do things that he may not want them to do. Just like in real life, whether magical powers or not, sometimes we follow people because of the things they say, the power they have, and sometimes you can go down some really, really bad roads. So I just really wanted to explore what that's like. You know, I think that, you know, power comes in all forms, voice, strength, and everything. And I just thought it was really interesting aspect to put that in this book, because Marvel has a ton of characters to choose from. You can't always use who you want to use. You know, I try to find characters that might have been underused in stories and comics. So that's a real fun part of it. And finding this character in particular, Bob, was a wonderful example of how someone uses their voice, the great evil or good. In this case, it happens to be evil. So yes, voice is very important.
I can see Lexi's excited. I'm so glad that my chosen segue here is deep dive Marvel fans, because the next question,
All right,
Buttered Cat is gleefully infused with a profound love of Marvel. So Lexi, and also Susan, I don't want to leave Susan out of this, but mostly Lexi. What do you love about superheroes? And what what do you love about superheroes, period? But also, follow-up question, what did you find useful in Buttered Cat about the structure of a superhero origin story?
Okay, this was her favorite question so far. So, right? All right. So I love so much about superhero stories, but outside the obvious fun and fantasy, I love that despite their crazy powers, behind each hero is a flawed person just trying to figure out life. They have the same faults and insecurities we all have. Contrasting that with the superhero persona makes the story so fun and relatable for me. As far as structure, she says you can't read and love a genre without it affecting you on some level. And I think my love does show in the structure of the Buttered Cat. What we found useful was making sure that it was obvious the main character, me, had things to learn about herself in life. It was about showing in Act 1 how I needed to change. Of course, I wasn't bitten by a radioactive spider or anything, but I did have a catalyst experience where I was told I would have 5 gifts, to me, my superpowers, send me off on a quest to figure out what they were. My love of Harry Potter also informs a lot of the structure. An outsider who has a secret, dark past that's kept hidden from them in a misguided attempt at protecting them. But it becomes evident that the only person who can right the wrongs from the past is the hero. So they have to learn about their past, and you can be sure it will be a painful lesson. So that's Lexi's take on it. Yeah, and I didn't realize that I was writing anything as a superhero story. So you can tell I don't have the same. But we work to this together, and Lexi influences everything we do. So if we have a bit of her superhero love and the structure, that's all the better.
It's a great structure. Works really well. Excellent. Continuing in this vein of superheroes. Veera, what do you love about superheroes in general and or about Wonder Woman in particular?
Well, Wonder Woman growing up was my favorite superhero. And I think for a lot of girls growing up in the 70s and something, it was really an eye-opening experience. Wonder Woman. I read the comic books, and then there was the show, and I hadn't attached myself to any superhero, and then there was this female superhero, and I just admired her so much, and I thought, of course, she was like beautiful and glamorous and all of that, and it's just funny to think about that now, but just that she had the power, and thinking about what Ron said about power and voice. I was a shy kid. I couldn't imagine just kind of having all of that power and then using, she used it for good, and she could kind of get herself out of any problem. And I think she had a power of being invisible. And I remember thinking, well, she also flew in the invisible plane, but she didn't seem invisible in the invisible plane. And I always wondered how that worked, because like the plane was invisible, but you could see her. Well, I was like, can other people see her? But that idea of having those powers, and it particularly being invisible, I was always really attracted to. And so Ariel at one point, talks about feeling there's a difference between like choosing to be invisible in sort of an empowering way of like getting information, or sort of being able to step back from a situation, or maybe put something in motion because nobody can see you, and feeling invisible. And there are times where and how powerless it is to feel invisible. And there are times where in her world, she feels invisible, and she's trying to figure out, how do she's sort of shy because of her circumstances, but she's actually inside not shy. And she just feels like, well, where is my entry point? Where can I feel more powerful and have a bigger voice? And part of it is she discovers typing poetry, and being able to kind of have a voice that way. And that sort of makes her feel braver to have an actual voice and speak out against things that she doesn't feel is right. So that's my long winding answer to that question.
Perfect. That is what we are here for. Ron, your love of this genre is well documented. Tell us more. about superheroes in general or about Black Panther in particular?
Oh boy, wow. Well, you know, I grew up reading comics. I have an older brother who was a big nerd, and you know, that's a term of endearment now for all of us.
Mhm.
um, but this was God, late 70s, dating myself. He was a meticulous comic book reader, and he had, they're all in his bedroom in the basement because he was the older kid. You know, he's got to have his own space. You know, so you know, Hulk, Howling Commandos, Nick Fury. I just ate that stuff up because I was also a military kid. So you know, I grew up on Air Force bases, so I was kind of drawn to those kind of comics as well. But you know, the category as a whole and just the genre, I just love it. I mean, I didn't only just read superhero books. I read what would they be called? Contemporary. I mean, Archie. I remember reading Archie comics, and I love that stuff because it takes you to it takes you to a new world, whether it's the world we live in now or a superhero world. And as a little kid, that's just so inspiring, especially for someone like me who moved around all the time. Every 2 years, we were on a new Air Force base, and I always knew that I could find some sense of home in a story, whether it was a comic book or a novel. So it really means what it is to me. It's like childhood kind of personified when I think back on comics and what they meant to me and the lessons they've taught, and also just about learning about the craft of storytelling. I mean, they played an important role in my career. So I mean, I could talk about comics forever, but Black Panther in particular, I knew who he was, of course. I wasn't a giant. I was a fan, of course, but I didn't know every detail about the Black Panther because this was also a long, long time ago where that stuff was just kind of harder to come by unless you owned every comic ever written. So when I was asked to write for Black Panther, it was kind of, I freaked out, of course, but at the same time, I'm glad that I had a little bit of lack of knowledge in certain areas because it allowed me to really dive in and write. I think if I had been more of a super nerd and knew every detail of every comic issue and every plot arc, it would have been harder because I'd been like, oh my God, everybody's watching me. What if I get this wrong? You know? So knowing the character and the world from a big perspective, I think it was a little bit less intimidating for me to write because I didn't, there were still things I had to learn. So it felt a little bit less intimidating going into it that way. But yeah.
And that brings up a parallel I hadn't thought of before, between this and writing historical fiction, whether recent or further away. That there's an intimidation of research. Like how can I write this when I don't know everything about the subject or the period or so that's a hugely important note of the freedom of not knowing everything.
Yeah. And oftentimes new writers especially get stuck in the research phase. I'm sure we can all relate to this. It's like, oh, I've got my notebook with the beautiful cover, got my coffee mug. I'm going to research for 5 years and then I'm going to write this note. No, you can't just go down the research hole and never come out. It's fun, but you have to jump in at some point. So there's another end to that as well.
Before I go to my next plan question, Veera, I feel like we should go over to you for the research question.
Yeah. I certainly, I wasn't that great a student of history when I was growing up because I always felt like it was not that exciting and it was hard for me to keep track of just like lists and names and dates and kind of spit them back out on a test. And I was always, I had this younger, like, I don't really like history, and so I see that in my son. I was sort of doing the same thing. And then when I wrote The Night Diary and now this and had to do a lot of research, I also, kind of freaked out. Like, I want to do this, but can I do this? Is this too hard for me? And I felt like it was a stop and start process, of sort of researching enough to kind of give the story a foundation. And then also just trying to tell this very specific story about somebody, an ordinary person experiencing an ordinary life in the midst of something maybe, more either globally historical or just extraordinary in some way, like in 1967, of all the things going on in this country, civil rights movement, Vietnam, but still staying focused on that just character in their small life of how they would be navigating. And so writing it and then stopping, and there were times where I felt like I need to now stop and do more research, and then write, and then stop and do more research. So that tends to be how I kind of trick myself into pretending it's not that hard.
Good. That's a good trick. I remember asking a teacher this question of when do you know when it's time to set the research down and start writing? And she smiled and said, "The instant you ask yourself that question, it is time."
Yeah.
And then I said, "Crap, I was hoping to put that off a while longer." And okay. Anyway, I have questions planned, and the next one is over to Lexi. But also, this is a theme all three of you. The technology of communication is shared in so many different ways by all three books. We've got Commodore bracelets, we've got sinister live streamed videos, a typewriter in a classroom that turns out to be pivotal, fridge magnet letters on a cookie sheet, computerized eye gaze typing and its hilarious limitations, cardboard speech bubbles brilliantly incorporated into a school play. And assistive tech in particular plays a very big role in two of these books. And here I'm trying to avoid giving away any spoilers about the buttered cat more than I already have. So this, I think, is a question more for Lexi, the author, than a question about Lexi, the mostly real character. What helped you write, and what do you plan to write next?
All right. So Lexi says, what helps me write is reading. I'm an obsessive reader. I can easily finish a book a day. I also love a bunch of different genres, from fantasy to realistic fiction to historical fiction. As long as there's a main character I can relate to, I'm in. A little romance doesn't hurt, LOL. When I write with Mom, I'm constantly thinking of aspects of other characters and how I relate to them, and try to bring that relatability into our story. As far as what I'm writing next, Mom and I are working on one more mostly true story. This one is about my service dog, Gus, who you meet in The Buttered Cat. It's not the typical service dog love story, because when Gus and I first started working together, we didn't even like each other very much.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Can't wait. And before moving on, I wanted to highlight that very beginning. What helps me write is reading. Everybody listening, all aspiring writers, what helps all of us write is reading. So please read. Sorry, what was that?
And caffeine.
And caffeine. Yes. Caffeine and reading. So read widely and wildly. Veera, assistive tech. What can you tell us about Ariel's typewriter and how to find what you're not looking for?
Sure. So Ariel is kind of discovering that, writing has always been difficult for her. Not only sort of handwriting and the formation of letters, but the keeping track of her writing while she's working so hard forming the letters. And she just knows that she feels like, writing's hard for me, and I'm just not that good at school. And school, it always happens in the same way, where the teacher notices that my writing needs work, and I need to sort of just try harder. And here's, the sort of wide ruled paper to help my letter formation. And she kind of knows the routine, and it's been going on for a few years. And her mother's really a hard worker, and she's, running this bakery with her husband and her kids, and they're just kind of trying to make ends meet. So her mom is more of just like, what's the next thing to do here? Let's just move it along, keep moving forward, don't stop, keep your head down. And so she doesn't really take the time to see what might be going on for Ariel as far as her, the way she's learning and the way she's writing. And it turns out that she has a teacher that does sort of focus in and is sort of progressive, a little past her time in 1967, ahead of her time in 1967 of figuring out what might be going on for Ariel. And she thinks it's something called dysgraphia, which is a learning difference where you do have trouble forming letters, but also because you're sort of putting so much energy into that, it's hard to formulate more in-depth writing and just keep everything organized. And Ariel has all these really deep thoughts and she wants to try to express herself. So the teacher thinks that if she types and gives her an electric typewriter to practice, and it kind of can take that step. If she learns how to type, she won't have to spend so much time forming letters, and then her thoughts may come easier. And it does really help her. And my son has dysgraphia, so learning how to type has been so great for him, to be able to kind of write and express what's on his mind as well. And the truth is, I also had trouble handwriting. I'm a terrible speller. And so I was never formally diagnosed with anything growing up in the 70s and the 80s, but I create everything on a laptop. I did have to wear a brace for my pencil because I never had like the proper way to hold the pencil. And so it has been really helpful for me to not have to handwrite and to have spell check and to just let my words flow. So I was really trying to create a character who was dealing with that at a time where there wasn't as much known about something like dysgraphia. And the tool that she has is an electric typewriter. So I just wanted to kind of create a character who is doing that, but those things don't change. It's just like the different tools that we have to help us communicate.
Excellent. And along those lines, Veera, what helps you write now, and what do you plan to write next?
Well, absolutely. I do not draft. Some people, really need that tactile experience of a journal first, and I draft everything on a laptop. I write notes on my phone. I find it just really does help me with organization. So that's, that is what helps me. Definitely caffeine, definitely reading other people's work. And also when I'm producing, to really try to remember, and this is what I tell students, because I teach both younger and adult students, to really understand that you will come back to this. You will revise probably 1,000,000 times. So in that space of just getting it out, don't worry about it. Even if you think it's like the worst writing you've ever done, like keep doing it for whatever time you've allotted for the day. I promise you'll be able to change it. And that for me helps me keep going even when I feel like, oh, what I'm writing is just not working. I try to just, write the word count, whatever it is, and move on. And the thing I'm working on next is a sequel to The Night Diary, my last book. So that's been really nice to revisit the characters in The Night Diary and sort of move their story forward.
Fantastic. Ron, 3 questions in this thread. With communication technology, the first question is, what would you do with a Commodore bracelet? Second question, what helps you write now? And third, what do you plan to write next?
I have a Commodore bracelet right here that you saw in the film. But I can't show it off because I'm under a disclosure. I can't show you how it works. Mm-hmm. But I would communicate with Wakanda with my Commodore bracelet. Yeah, I mean, God, the technology that Marvel has in this character is amazing. I mean, the Commodore bracelets, the Commodore cards, they're communication devices. They store your health records. They do all this cool stuff. And that's a pretty cool thing to like work in a world that has this much technology. I'm kind of like, this is a funny question. My motivation, I guess, is deadlines. Because, I don't write every day. Don't tell anybody, whoever's listening. Because we always say that, right? Write every day. Sometimes you can't. You can think about it. You can jot notes on your phone, like Veera just said. And that's my kind of method. I'm drafting the moment I sit down and start writing. Draft to 0, right? I love the fancy notebooks. and the journals, but I buy them and I hardly ever fill them with anything. But most of my work comes at the computer, writing, getting past the bad structure and all that stuff. You just have to go over and over and over, just keep polishing. But, you know, I think I'm more of a, we have these words, right, in writing. You're either a plotter or a pantser, right? And I'm a pantser. I kind of discover the story as I'm writing it. You know, sometimes you take a detour and you have to come back to it and go a different way. But I'm jealous of people who can write really long synopses and, you know, have everything planned out. I have to write to discover where the story's going. So that's my method. There's no one way to do it. Every writer is different. But that seems to work for me. It's like 10% creativity and 99% anxiety. And somehow it gets done. And the thing that I'm working on now is there's another book in the Black Panther series. It's going to be 3. So I'm working on that right now. I don't think I can say anything else about it, but I think it's going to be a cool conclusion to the series. So that's what I'm working on.
I have so many questions, and I'm not going to ask any of them. You're probably not allowed to answer them. Okay. Excellent. Those are all the questions I have planned, and we have 5 minutes left of our allotted time.
Well, I'm so glad that we're able to have all of you here. Thank you so much, William, for doing such a wonderful job of hosting this panel. And I do have a couple of audience questions for these last couple minutes before we head out. So the first question is about what inspires you. And so you talked a lot about the comics that inspired you when you were younger and your connections to comic books, but what other books or media either inspired you to become authors or just inspire you in general? What were your favorite books and media growing up?
For everybody?
Yes, yeah, just to everybody. So you go ahead and go first.
Well, I think you know, books that was available to me were like E.B. White and Charlotte's Web in particular was the big one for me, and a lot of other people. Beverly Cleary, Judy Blume, Roald Dahl, you know, all of those books. And I think I changed schools between 4th and 5th grade, and I didn't have any friends in the new school. And I think that's when I really zoned in on reading in a way that I had never had before, because they were kind of keeping me company. So those writers and those books kind of launched my love for reading and writing forever, I would say.
I think for me, you know, I love writing for middle grade because that's the period of my life that I remember where books meant so much to me, and discovering new stories and discovering new worlds. You know, I love the old school middle grade stuff, Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, those books are the ones that really took me away, and just like, especially like I said, a military kid growing up, I remember going to libraries in new schools, and there would always be a kindly librarian. That's why I like librarians and teachers so much, because they would recommend a book that I'd never heard about, and it always brought me back to that place of imagination. You know, I'm still waiting for the owl from Hogwarts to land on my window so I can go. But yeah, I mean, The Lord of the Rings, Narnia, all those books. And then, you know, of course, as I got older, I said, well, you know, I love those books so much. And it took me a long time to realize it. I didn't realize it when I was reading them, but when I grew up, I realized I don't remember seeing any black hobbits. So I said, you know, there's all kinds of fantasy and mythology stories that we can write where we can see ourselves in these stories. So that's something that I think is really important. But those were the stories that first got me into the realm of the imagination and the fantastical worlds. And yeah, and that's always been inspiring to me. So big fantasy nerd, always.
And I'd say we agree. I would agree with both Veera and Ron on aspects of that. Like Veera, I grew up with Roald Dahl and Judy Blume. And of course, those were, you know, middle grade was a smaller genre then than it is now. But, you know, those are the books that stick with you. I think middle grade sticks with you probably longer than any other genre, because there are in your formative years. For Lexi, she's got a zillion favorite writers. It's whatever she's reading that day. But we'll go back to Harry Potter was, huge in her life. I mean, we went through probably 2 years where we listened to those books over and over and over again, where she would start laughing, before she, they would even say what was coming out, because she knew it by heart. But like Ron, we looked at it and said, hey, where are the disabled wizards? Do they not let any of these people in their schools? Don't they know that they need to have some disabled wizards? So, it became important to us to sort of add to that body of literature too, and to feel like the disability story needs to be explored a little bit more. And we heard an awful lot, we don't want stories about disability. We want just stories about writers who happen to have, or characters who happen to have disabilities. And, we thought that sort of, skipping a big portion of information that we need. Before you can start talking about disability, kids need to know a little bit more about why. It's hard to just throw right in and say this character has autism, this character has cerebral palsy, without kids having a basis for understanding. So we sort of started with that for us. So those, I kind of got off track there a little bit, sorry. But those are the characters that are the books and the authors that inspired us.
Well, it's actually kind of a good segue into the next portion, because it's also, the other question that we have is also about inspiration, but it's specifically, somebody asked, Ron, what does your brother think about your job now? And I'll open that up to everybody, because obviously, Susan and Lexi, you've got sort of a family business going. And, what is it like as a writer? How does your family feel about it? How's the experience of being a writer changed from how you thought it would be when you were a kid?
Oh, wow. That's actually a really good question. Well, I mean, it's a dream come true, really. And it's a great honor to write for young people, because, like I said, I remember those days ordering from the Scholastic Book Fair, and the books would come into the classroom, and the smell of the pulpy paper in the books, all of that stuff. But no, it's the greatest job in the world. I mean, I worked in advertising for many years, like writing ads for big corporations and stuff. And that was fun for a long time, but I was always working on the project, getting up early in the morning and going to the coffee shop and working on books. And to actually see that dream realized is really, really cool. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes on the bad days when the words aren't coming or something's not working right. It's still like, well, I have a pretty cool job. I get to write full time, so that's pretty awesome. So yeah, the family's always supported my writing and my weird creative fantasy, as a kid. But no, they've always been a great support. And yeah, my brothers, they love what I do, and they've been supportive. So yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. I think for me, it's more just kind of figuring out and clarifying my identity as a biracial kid from an interfaith family, and also not reading stories about people with my similar background growing up. And so wanting to kind of put that out in the world, but also just to kind of, my last book, The Night Diary, was much more about researching my father's side of the family and my Indian identity. And then this book is much more about researching. I did more research on my mother's side of the family and my Jewish identity. So for me, it's kind of figuring out who I am through creating these stories that allow me to do more research, not just kind of general research, but family history research that just is kind of my own personal journey. And then I'm just glad that it resonates with other people.
Well, I agree with Ron. This is just definitely the best job ever. Would you say also Lexi agrees? She hasn't had a different career. I came to this from medical writing, which is much less satisfying. It's definitely a steady paycheck, but it doesn't give you the same feeling, you don't get people telling you, how much your story changed, their perspective or their opinion. And you know, that's an incredible feeling to feel like you've touched somebody in that way. You know, our family, my husband and my 4 other kids have been incredibly supportive, and they were helpful in creating the book. They were really, really gracious about letting us put parts of their lives in there, which is, you know, an expose a little bit on growing up Hass in the Hass family. You know, one of my kids did say, "Do you really want to share that story about the buttered cat part with everybody?" My dad, on the other hand, my 88-year-old dad, asked me one day a couple of years ago, about, like, how are you doing with the medical writing? How's your writing going? And I said, well, Dad, I've really switched gears lately. And, you know, Lexi and I are working on a book together. And he shook his head and he said, that's too bad. You were really good at medical writing. So he doesn't get it, but that's okay.
Well, you know, the important part is that so many readers out there get it and love it. And for all of you, I think I speak for many, many readers when I say that you've written books that have influenced and changed and made happier and better so many lives. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to remind everybody watching once again that you can get these books from our wonderful independent bookselling partner, Red Balloon Bookshop. And you will be supporting all these lovely folks and a good independent bookstore and our festival. Thank you again for joining us. And we do have other great festival events coming up. We'll put a link in the chat for those if you want to check them out. And I'm going to thank our media sponsors as well, who are Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, Minnesota Public Radio, the Star Tribune, and Twin Cities Public Television, as well as, again, the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board for their support. Thank you all for supporting us by being here, and thank you for joining us on this lovely Saturday morning. We hope to see you again soon.